Politicians, I have a message for you. Americans no longer care about the R or the D after your name. In fact, for a lot of Americans, those letters will probably hurt you. We care about your character. Americans don't want someone whom they always agree with, but someone they can always trust. We want to be a part of a process that is open, transparent, and fair. But most of all, we just want you to do what you promised you would do. We'll call you with our thoughts when we can, but you've got to keep your end of the bargain. Then, and only then, you'll have nothing to worry about. We will be there to watch your back. Let us be the radical thinkers of our day, and remember the common sense warnings that George Washington gave us in his farewell speech. The common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of the party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. It serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments occasionally riot and insurrection. A fire not to be quenched, it demands a uniform vigilance to prevent its bursting into a flame, lest, instead of warming, it should consume. We are now experiencing exactly what George Washington warned us about. Neither party is serious about finding solutions. Their focus is instead on building their own tiny political empires where their guy wins while the country burns. That is not leadership. That is national homicide. They seek to incite political support or raise money by pitting us against each other on issues like abortion or gun control, immigration, and gay marriage, because they know that by igniting heated arguments, the issues are less likely to be solved and their careers are more likely to be secure. Every time you vote against someone rather than for someone, the two-party system wins, and America loses. When we support or vote for candidates outside the two major political parties, we are immediately lectured about wasting our vote or making it easier for the less desirable of the two major candidates to claim victory. These lies are repeated every election, and they must be ignored. You never waste your vote if you vote your conscience. Need proof? Let's look at Arlen Specter. In the 2004 election, two third-party candidates ran, both of whom were considered far more conservative than Specter. But most conservatives figured those minor party candidates would never win, so they sold out their own values and voted for someone who very few people considered to be a true conservative. Now, nearly 5 years later, Specter switched from the Republicans to the Democrats. So I ask you, who wasted their vote? The 4% of people who went with the candidates from the Constitution or Libertarian parties? Or the 53% who voted for a man who later stabbed them in the back by switching parties simply to have the best shot at winning his next election? Common sense tells us that supporting the individual of our choice after having studied his position on the issues is never a waste. Are truth, honesty, and candor any less desirable in candidates that don't happen to be Republicans or Democrats? Stop believing their lies. The enemies are at the gate. They have been there for quite some time. Many liberals have begun to call themselves progressives instead because it sounds new and forward-thinking. But the truth is, it is anything but. It is a movement that requires Americans to sever the ties to our founding and follow an ever-evolving social gospel instead. Common sense tells us that a government that can provide everything is a government capable of taking everything. Wake up. We don't need a new party in power. We need a new way forward. Enough about them. How about us? The American people they're like the suckers in a horror movie that always seem to do the stupid thing while the audience is shouting, "Don't open that door! Don't go in there!" But for a short time, we actually listened. We didn't open that door. Instead, we remembered who we really are. September 11th, 2001 changed us as a country. Do you remember the lines filled with Americans who just wanted to donate blood, even though there was none needed? Do you remember the following Sunday's football games were postponed, that the late-night comedians deferred their jokes, and that even trial lawyers respected a self-imposed moratorium on terrorist-related lawsuits? After 9/11, we began to remember our heritage and the power of sacrifice. We returned to our churches, synagogues, and mosques. We reconnected with our neighbors, our friends, our families. 4 months after those attacks, 61% of us believed our country had changed for the better. But short-sighted politicians, professors, businessmen, and other experts who saw America as a giant shopping mall didn't really like the changes. If people were getting to know each other again, they wouldn't be out buying stuff. And if people stopped buying stuff, well, then the whole Ponzi scheme would collapse far sooner than those same experts had expected. The same television executives who filled our sets with acts of violence, murder, and sex took the video of the planes crashing into the towers off the air because they were too offensive or too painful for most people to bear. It was another lie, but it worked. We stopped thinking about 9/11 and how fragile our freedom is, and instead we followed President Bush's advice to go spend money and get on down to Disney World in Florida. Take your families and enjoy life the way it ought to be enjoyed. The result is that only about 21% of us now believe our country is better off today than it was before September 11th. We've gone back to being September 10th people. Our heads are once again buried in the sand, and our hands are out waiting for the next entitlement paid with free government money. Oh, the free cheese. California is a prime example of that. Their budget went from $75 billion to $145 billion in about 10 years, a 92% increase in state spending. Then their house of cards came crashing down. California was short $42 billion on their last budget, yet they still won't do the common sense things that get them back on track, like lifting restrictions on offshore oil drilling. In fact, they're doing the opposite, using the same kind of financial schemes that got them into the mess to get them out of it. Their latest act of genius is to sell bonds to themselves, something that is akin to borrowing money from your wife. If they won't sacrifice for themselves, why should the rest of the country sacrifice for them? We are once again living in the days that will try men's souls, days that will be remembered by historians as great and perilous. But how will history remember us? Will we be remembered as the heroes of our time, or as those who lost that which was most precious in order to satiate our own desires and appetites?